Seattle rain doesn't fall, it invades. It creeps beneath your collar, finds every gap in your defenses, and settles deep into your soul like an unwelcome tenant. I huddled on flattened cardboard that once protected someone's washing machine, while the Duwamish River flowed thick and dark just yards from where I sat. The underside of the West Seattle Bridge formed my ceiling now, a concrete sky echoing with the thunder of traffic overhead. Each passing vehicle sent vibrations to the support columns, reminders that the world continued spinning above while I remained frozen below. My feet, bloated and trapped in sneakers worn through at the heels, pulsed with every heartbeat. I tried to remember the scent of jasmine from my garden in Queen Anne, the weight of a good book in my lap, the click of my own front door lock. Instead, I smelled damp cement and the metallic bite of despair. Strange, isn't it? To become invisible in a city where you once taught 4 decades of students their multiplication tables. I was a phantom haunting my own existence, a shadow of the woman who corrected homework while classical music played softly in the background. Elodie? Elodie Chen? The voice shattered my reverie like a rock through glass. I didn't want to raise my head. Looking up meant confronting my reflection in someone else's shock and pity. I knew what they'd see: matted silver hair, 3 mismatched coats, the empty stare of someone who'd touched the bottom of the well. But I recognized that voice. It pulled me back through decades of Tuesday afternoon book clubs and shared recipes when our spouses were alive and our biggest concern was whether the hydrangeas would bloom. It was Dorothy. Dorothy, who used to bring me blueberry scones when we'd discuss Austen and Bronte, back when tragedy meant a late summer rain spoiling the neighborhood potluck. Shame crashed over me like a wave, violent and disorienting. I wanted to dissolve into the concrete, to let the river carry my humiliation out to Puget Sound where the cold water could wash away my failure. I lifted my eyes slowly. Dorothy stood frozen, her red umbrella a cruel splash of color against the gray monotone of my world. Horror painted her features. Her hand covered her mouth, and I watched her gaze travel across my stained clothing, the grime under my nails, the pathetic collection of my life stuffed into 2 torn shopping bags. She looked at me like I was a tragedy from the evening news, something terrible that happened to other people. But what she asked next would force me to speak the truth I'd been trying to bury beneath this bridge. Elodie, dear God, what happened? Where's your house? Where's David? Her questions landed like physical blows, each one finding a tender spot I thought had calcified into scar tissue. David. My son. The boy I'd carried for 9 months, loved for 42 years, the man who'd squeezed my hand at his father's funeral and sworn I'd never want for anything. I tried to form words, but my throat felt lined with sandpaper and swallowed screams. I cleared it, the sound harsh and animal-like in the damp air. He took it, Dorothy, I whispered, my voice sounding like a stranger's. David took the house to protect me. That's what he called it. Protection. The words tasted like poison, but saying them aloud didn't bring the relief I'd imagined. Instead, I felt hollowed out, emptier than before. Dorothy stepped closer, her expensive leather boots squelching in the mud. She reached toward my shoulder, but I flinched away. I couldn't bear her pity. Pity was just guilt wearing a concerned face, a way for the safe to feel better about their safety while changing nothing. I wanted my life back. I wanted the weight of my own keys in my pocket, the smell of my rose garden after rain, the luxury of waking in sheets that didn't carry the scent of other people's nightmares. What do you mean he took it? Dorothy's voice rose, sharp with disbelief. That house was yours, Elodie. Paid in full. Thomas worked at Boeing for 37 years to make sure you were secure. He had documents, Dorothy. My voice cracked. So many documents. And Nicole, his wife, she was there with that frozen smile of hers. They said the property taxes were astronomical, that the foundation was cracking, that I was becoming confused. They told me they'd handle everything. They said I'd move into the downstairs suite, the one with the view of Elliott Bay. They promised doctors, home-cooked meals, companionship. I paused, the memory rising like bile in my throat. David knelt beside my chair and took both my hands. I looked into his eyes and saw the 7-year-old who'd cried when he fell off his bike. I believed him, Dorothy. I believed him because mothers are wired to believe that the child they grew cannot have a hollow core where their heart should be. Dorothy's face had gone pale, her umbrella trembling in her grip. But if they promised to care for you, then how? She gestured at the bridge, at my cardboard mattress, at the impossible reality before her. Because promises, I said, are just words. And words don't keep you warm when your own son locks you out in the cold. The memory crashed over me like a rogue wave. It was a Thursday in October, the air sharp with the promise of winter. David had arrived with Nicole, carrying an Italian leather briefcase and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. I'd spent the day making pot roast, the house filled with the aroma of comfort and normalcy. The dining room glowed in the autumn light, the same room where we'd celebrated David's birthdays, his graduation, where we'd held Thomas's wake. I'd polished the silver candlesticks, wanting everything perfect for my son. I was decorating the table for my own funeral and didn't even know it. "Mom, you look exhausted," David had said, standing behind my chair, hands resting on my shoulders. I'd leaned into his touch, feeling that dangerous cocktail of pride and relief. My son, the successful property developer, the man who understood the value of every building in this city. "The house is becoming a burden, Elodie," Nicole had interjected, her manicured nails clicking against her wine glass. David reviewed the tax assessments yesterday. They've quadrupled in 6 years. And that foundation issue? The engineer's estimate was $28,000 just for stabilization work. You shouldn't be stressed about these things at your age. I'd looked around at the crown molding Thomas had installed by hand, at the doorframe marked with David's growth charts from age 2 to 18. "I don't mind caring for it," I'd whispered. "It keeps me close to your father." David had pulled up a chair then, leaning in with wide, earnest eyes. This was my David, or so I thought, the boy who'd brought me dandelions and promised to protect me forever. "We need to protect your assets, Mom. If you ever need long-term care, the state could seize this house to pay for it. But if we transfer it to a family trust now, if it's in my name legally, it's shielded. You stay right here, exactly as you are. I just handle the paperwork and the headaches. You're the queen, I'm just the property manager." He'd opened the briefcase. The documents were crisp, official, intimidating. I taught English literature for 40 years, but this language was designed to obscure truth behind terms like quitclaim deed and irrevocable transfer. "Are you certain about this, David?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Your father wanted. Dad would want you protected, Mom." His voice dropped, taking on a wounded tone. "Don't you trust me? I'm your son. Your only family." There it was, the trap disguised as love. My hesitation became evidence of failed motherhood. I picked up the pen. And with each signature, I signed away everything Thomas had built to keep me safe. "But you're here, Elodie. Under a bridge. How can you be here if they were caring for you?" Dorothy's voice cracked with rising anger, drawing glances from others sheltering in the concrete shadows. I lowered my head, humiliation a physical weight on my neck. "It started with the lower level," I said, words coming faster now, a dam breaking. 3 weeks after the papers were filed, David told me they needed the downstairs suite for Nicole's business. Her consulting firm was expanding, he said. She needed a professional space with proper lighting. I could still see his apologetic smile, still hear his reasonable tone. He said the basement was actually better for my arthritis, cooler, more consistent temperature. He moved my bed down there, between the holiday decorations and the furnace. Told me it was temporary, just until they converted the garage into my permanent space. The lie had been so smooth, so plausible. Then the locks changed. Not all at once, just the front door initially. I'd go for my afternoon walk to the park, and when I returned, I'd find the door bolted from inside. I'd wait on the porch for hours, sometimes until dark, until they decided to let me in. Dorothy made a sound like a wounded animal. They stopped including me at meals. Nicole said my cough disturbed her digestion. Said I smelled like old age. David would sit there, staring at his phone while his wife informed me I was a guest in their home, and guests should remain out of sight. The fury radiating off Dorothy was clean and sharp. I was too exhausted to match it. I was just tired, tired of cold, tired of rain, tired of the silence that had become my only companion. The night they disposed of me, it was raining like this. My voice went flat, mechanical. David came to the basement. Wouldn't look at me. Just held a garbage bag. Said they'd found a buyer, someone offering $3.2 million, cash deal, quick close. I could still see his face in that moment, empty of everything I'd once believed was there. I asked where I was supposed to go. He said he'd researched facilities, but they all cost too much. Said I'd been draining their resources long enough. He said, my voice broke, he said, Mom, you always taught me to be practical. I'm being practical now. I'm protecting my own family. Then he handed me my coat and these bags. Led me to the door. Closed it. I heard the deadbolt slide home, the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I walked until my feet bled, Dorothy. I walked until I couldn't remember the way home, because the home I knew had been erased. Dorothy was crying now, tears mixing with the mist. She dropped her umbrella and reached down, pulling me up from the cardboard. My joints screamed in protest, a symphony of pain that nearly made me black out. But I felt her solid warmth, her living presence against my tattered layers. You're coming with me, Elodie. Right now. We're getting you out of this cold, getting you fed and warm, and then we're calling people. This isn't your ending. I don't care what David thinks he's done, you're not a ghost, and you're not dying under this bridge. She led me away from the concrete cathedral, away from the river's indifferent flow. I glanced back once at my cardboard island, so small, so pathetic, a brown square in an ocean of gray. I thought about David, probably in some upscale restaurant at this very moment, ordering wine and discussing investment properties with money stolen from my life. I thought about how he used to wake me with nightmares, crying mommy, and I wondered when that boy had been replaced by the man who could abandon his mother to freeze in the dark. As we approached Dorothy's car, the rain intensified, turning the world into a watercolor blur. I felt something flicker in my chest, a tiny spark that wasn't just the cold. It was realization. David thought he'd erased me. He thought that by taking my house, he'd deleted my existence. But as the car's heater hit my face, I knew he was wrong. He'd taken the bricks and the mortar, the garden and the memories. But he hadn't taken the truth. And the truth was the one thing David couldn't sell for $3.2 million. I have the recording, Dorothy, I whispered as she pulled away from the curb. My hand clutched the old phone I'd hidden in my coat lining, the one David didn't know I still had. I recorded the night he told me about the sale. I recorded everything. Dorothy's eyes widened in the rearview mirror. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a woman about to haunt the people who thought they'd buried her alive. The road ahead was dark and long, like every Seattle winter. But as the bridge disappeared into the mist behind us, I knew I was no longer sitting in the cold. I was moving toward a reckoning that David Chen could never have imagined when he closed that door on his mother. I pressed my forehead against the car window, watching the city lights blur into golden streaks. My mind churned with images: David's first steps on our Queen Anne lawn, Thomas laughing when the sprinklers soaked him, and then that deadbolt sliding shut. The betrayal was a physical thing, a stone lodged in my stomach that refused to dissolve. David had gambled everything on a simple calculation, that I was too weak, too old, too ashamed to fight back. He'd counted on the stigma of homelessness to keep me silent, believing his mother would rather rot in obscurity than expose her son as a monster. He'd underestimated one crucial thing: my capacity for endurance. I had survived Thomas's death, the slow erosion of my teaching career to arthritis, and the agonizing dissolution of my family. Being under that bridge hadn't broken me. It had stripped away everything that wasn't essential. "We'll get an attorney, Elodie," Dorothy said firmly, navigating the slick streets. "The best in the city. I have savings put aside, and Thomas's old law partner still practices downtown. They won't know what hit them." I couldn't answer. I was mentally cataloging what David had discarded: my mother's quilt, my grandmother's china, the photo albums that proved we were once happy. Those things were gone, probably sold or trashed to make room for Nicole's minimalist aesthetic. The thought of strangers sleeping in my bed, looking out my window, made me nauseous. But as Dorothy turned onto her quiet street, I felt something different returning. My name. My identity. I wasn't the guest anymore. Wasn't the cough or the burden. I was Elodie Chen. And I was coming back, even if I had to rebuild everything from the ashes of my son's greed. We pulled into her driveway. The house was a modest craftsman bungalow, porch light casting warmth on the wet pavement. Humble compared to what David had stolen, but to me it looked like salvation. I stood in the rain one last moment, looking up at the gray Seattle sky. I thought of thousands still under those bridges, people without a Dorothy, people whose children had also decided they weren't worth the cost of a room. My heart went out to them, but my mind focused on the battle ahead. I'd spent my life teaching that every story has 3 parts: beginning, middle, and end. David had written my beginning and middle. But I was writing the final chapter. And it wasn't going to be a tragedy. It was going to be a lesson he'd never forget. Inside, the air was thick with lavender and vanilla. Dorothy led me to the bathroom, her hands gentle as she helped me peel off my wet, filthy layers. I caught my reflection in the mirror and forced myself not to look away this time. I examined the wrinkles, the gray hair, the hollow cheeks. I looked at the woman David had tried to destroy. Yes, I saw pain. But I also saw something else: the eyes of a teacher who'd handled difficult students for 40 years and wasn't afraid of a bully, even if that bully was her own son. "Take as long as you need," Dorothy whispered, handing me a thick towel. "I'm making soup." I stepped into the shower. As hot water hit my skin, I released a sound that was half sob, half laugh. The grime of the bridge spiraled down the drain, a dark swirl of failure and filth. I scrubbed until my skin burned, needing to be clean, needing to be whole. I thought about the recording on my phone, the digital ghost of David's cruelty. It was my only weapon, a single beam of light in a very dark room. David thought he was a master of real estate. But he'd forgotten the most important rule of any transaction: never underestimate someone who has nothing left to lose. I closed my eyes, letting steam fill my lungs, preparing for the war ahead. I was Elodie Chen, and I was no longer invisible. The steam couldn't touch the deep chill that had settled into my bones under the West Seattle Bridge. I wrapped myself in Dorothy's towel, but my skin felt foreign, like clothing worn by someone else. I stared at the fogged mirror and saw the ghost of my queen and house in the swirling vapor. I could almost smell the furniture polish, the rain-dampened earth from my garden. That house wasn't just wood and stone. It was the physical manifestation of Thomas's love, of 37 years of shared coffee and quiet evenings. Now it was a crime scene without any tape marking its boundaries. The crime hadn't been committed with a weapon, but with a pen and a smile I'd once believed was my greatest achievement as a mother. I closed my eyes, and that evening rushed back with tidal force. Thursday, October. Crisp air, autumn light slanting through my dining room windows. David arriving with Nicole, expensive wine, that leather briefcase. I'd spent the afternoon preparing dinner, making everything perfect for my son. I didn't know I was preparing the stage for my own execution. "Mom, you look so tired," David had said, standing behind my chair, hands on my shoulders. I'd leaned back into his touch, pride swelling in my chest. My son, the property developer, the man who understood value and worth. I thought he was my protector. I thought he was the fortress Thomas had promised he'd become. "The house is overwhelming you, Elodie," Nicole had said, her voice smooth as silk over a blade. She sat across from me, perfect nails clicking against crystal. David was reviewing the tax assessments today. They've quadrupled in 6 years. And that foundation issue? The structural engineer quoted $28,000 just for stabilization. "We hate seeing you stressed like this. You should be enjoying your retirement, traveling, visiting museums, not worrying about contractors and property taxes." I'd looked around at the crown molding Thomas had installed himself, at the doorframe marked with David's height progression from toddler to man. "I like caring for it," I'd whispered, my voice small even to my own ears. "It keeps me busy. Keeps me close to your father." David had sat down then, leaning close, eyes wide and earnest. This was the David I knew, or thought I knew. The boy who'd brought me dandelions, promised to build me a castle someday. "We want to protect you, Mom. If anything happens, if you need medical care, the state could seize this house to pay for it. But if we transfer it to a family trust now, if you put it in my name on paper, it's protected. It stays in the family. You stay here, exactly as you are. I just handle the logistics. You're the queen without the burden of the crown." He'd opened the briefcase. The pages were crisp, the legal language dense and deliberately confusing. I'm an educated woman, but those documents were written to obscure truth behind terms like quitclaim deed and irrevocable transfer. I looked for the word eviction, but it wasn't there. I looked for betrayal, but it was hidden behind legal jargon. "Are you certain, David?" My heart hammered. "Your father wanted me to have this house until... Dad would want you safe, Mom." His voice dropped, a note of hurt creeping in. "Don't you trust me? I'm your son. Your only family." That was the hook, the guilt, the silent accusation that my hesitation was a failure of maternal love. Shame washed over me. How could I doubt my own child? How could I believe the boy I'd nursed and raised would ever want me to suffer? I picked up the pen. I remember its weight, the cold metal against my skin. With each signature, I signed away the garden, the attic, the room where Thomas had died. When I finished, the ink looked black and final, like a line of ants marching away with my future. Nicole had smiled then. Not the smile of a daughter-in-law, but the smile of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. She'd snapped the briefcase shut with a sound like a gunshot. "Well," she'd said, her voice suddenly crisp and businesslike, "that's settled. Now, about that lower-level suite. We were thinking it would be more practical for your arthritis if we moved your primary living space to the garden level." Garden level. Their euphemism for basement. The transition was a slow-motion catastrophe. Not overnight, but relentless. Within a month, my bedroom furniture had been relocated to the basement, a cold, damp space that smelled of detergent and old newspapers. David told me they needed the upstairs bedroom for Nicole's innovation hub for her consulting business. I'd stood in the doorway of my room, watching strangers carry out the vanity Thomas had bought me for our 20th anniversary. They'd handled it carelessly, scratching the wood against the doorframe. I wanted to scream, but the words died in my throat. I was a guest now. A guest in the house Thomas had built for me. The meals went next. Initially, I was invited upstairs for dinner, but the atmosphere was thick with tension that turned food to ash in my mouth. Nicole would monologue about market trends and portfolio optimization while David stared at his plate, avoiding my eyes. Then came the evening Nicole suggested I take meals in the basement. She said my presence made it difficult to discuss sensitive business matters. I remember sitting at the card table David had set up for me next to the water heater. Canned soup and dry toast. Upstairs, I could hear muffled laughter, clinking glasses. I could hear the life I'd built continuing without me, as if I were already dead and buried beneath their feet. I became a ghost in my own kitchen. I'd creep upstairs for water in the middle of the night, moving like a thief, terrified of waking the people who'd stolen my world. Then the locks changed. I'd gone for a walk to the rose garden, needing to touch something that still recognized me. When I returned, my 30-year-old key wouldn't turn. I stood on that porch for 3 hours in light drizzle, knuckles raw from knocking. When David finally opened the door, he didn't apologize. He looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and pity. "We had to upgrade security, Mom. Nicole's firm handles sensitive data. We can't have the house accessible to just anyone. I forgot to get you a new key. Just use the side door from now on," he'd said. The side door. The one they used for taking out the trash. The humiliation was poison seeping into my soul. I stopped calling friends. Stopped going to church. I couldn't bear the questions, the sympathetic looks, the inevitable "how's David doing?" I was too ashamed to admit my son had turned me into a prisoner in my own basement. I began doubting my own mind. Nicole would claim I'd left the stove on when I hadn't used it in days. She'd insist I was losing my hearing, screaming at me until my ears rang, only to whisper to David that I was slipping. They were gaslighting me, dimming my reality until I felt like I was disappearing into the shadows beside the water heater. I remember one night, huddled under blankets in the basement cold, hearing David and Nicole arguing upstairs. Their voices drifted through the floorboards, sharp and ugly. "We could get 3.2 if we list now," Nicole was saying. "The market's peaking. We could move to that waterfront condo. Think of the commute, David. Think of the lifestyle. What about Mom?" David's voice was low, weak. "There are facilities, David. Professional places. She needs more care than we can provide. Look at her, she's obsessed with that basement. It's not healthy. If we sell, we can pay for a decent nursing home. Somewhere she'll be around people her own age. Facilities. A decent place." They were discussing me like I was furniture they were planning to replace. I felt cold, sharp clarity in that moment. David wasn't protecting my assets. He was liquidating my life. He'd never intended for me to stay. The trust, the guest suite, the care, all elaborate lies designed to get me to sign without resistance. I'd been a pawn in a real estate deal, and the game was almost over. I'd reached for my old smartphone then, the one Thomas had taught me to use. I tapped the voice memo icon. I didn't know why I was doing it, only that I needed to capture my own destruction. I held the phone toward the ceiling, recording their muffled greed. "I don't know, Nicole." David sighed. "She won't go quietly. She loves this place. Then we make her uncomfortable enough that leaving looks like her choice," Nicole said coldly. "Cut the heat to the basement. Stop buying her groceries. She'll get the message." I'd lain there in the dark, phone still recording, understanding with crystalline clarity that my son had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone capable of cruelty I couldn't have imagined. And 3 weeks later, on a rainy November night, he came down to the basement with a garbage bag and told me they'd found a buyer. David didn't look at me that night. Just stood there holding a black garbage bag, his face expressionless in the dim basement light. "We found a buyer," he said flatly. "Cash offer. 3.2 million. Quick close, 30 days. I'd stared at him, not comprehending. "What does that mean for?" "It means you need to pack. Tonight." The words didn't make sense. They were sounds without meaning, a foreign language I couldn't parse. Pack? "David, where am I supposed to?" I looked into some places. He finally met my eyes, and they were empty. Stranger's eyes. "But they're expensive, Mom. Really expensive. You've been draining our resources for a while now. The utilities, the food, the extra expenses. Nicole and we need to think about our future. Our family." "I'm your family," I whispered. "You always taught me to be practical," he said, his voice hardening. "To make tough decisions. I'm making a tough decision now. I'm protecting my wife and our future. David, please. The bag's for essentials. You have 30 minutes. My hand shook as I filled that garbage bag. 30 minutes to pack 42 years of motherhood. I grabbed medications, a change of clothes, a photo of Thomas. The phone, I made sure to take the phone. When I emerged from the basement, David was holding my coat. Nicole stood in the hallway, arms crossed, watching like I was a tenant being evicted for non-payment. "David," I tried one more time. "It's raining. It's November. Where am I supposed to go?" "There's a shelter on 3rd Avenue, Nicole said. "They have beds available." David handed me the coat and the bags. Led me to the door. His hand on my elbow was firm, impersonal, the way you'd guide a stranger. At the threshold of my own home, I turned back. "David, please. I'm your mother. Goodbye, Mom." He closed the door. I heard the deadbolt slide home, a sound that echoed in my chest like a gunshot. I walked. In the rain, with no destination. I walked until my feet bled, until I couldn't remember the way home because home had been erased. Eventually, I found the bridge. The concrete cathedral where the invisible go to disappear. And I would have disappeared, would it become another statistic, another elderly woman lost to the streets. But then Dorothy found me. And everything changed. "This recording," Dorothy said as we sat in her warm kitchen, soup steaming between us. "What exactly is on it, Elodie?" I pulled the phone from my coat pocket. Miraculously, it still held a charge. My hands trembled as I navigated to the voice memos. The night they argued about selling. The night Nicole laid out their whole plan. I pressed play. Nicole's voice filled the kitchen, cold and calculating. We could get 3.2 if we list now. If we sell, we can pay for a decent nursing home. Then we make her uncomfortable enough that leaving looks like her choice. Cut the heat to the basement. Stop buying her groceries. She'll get the message. David's weak protests. His eventual agreement. Their casual discussion of my disposal. Dorothy's face went white, then red with fury. Elodie, this is evidence of elder abuse. Financial exploitation. Possibly fraud in how they obtained the house. This recording could what? I asked bitterly. Get my house back? Undo what's been done. It could send them to prison, Dorothy said quietly. The words hung in the air between us. Prison? My son. The boy who'd held my hand crossing the street, who'd cried at his father's funeral. The man who'd thrown me out with a garbage bag and 30 minutes' notice. I also had the transfer documents, I said. David gave me copies, probably thought I'd lose them or throw them away. But I kept them. Even in the basement, even when I had nothing, I kept those papers. Dorothy leaned forward. Tomorrow, we call my attorney friend. Peter Morrison, he's a shark, Elodie. He handled Thomas's law partner's divorce, and he's got connections with the DA's office. We present everything, the recording, the documents, your testimony about the conditions they kept you in. They'll say I'm senile, I said. That I gave them the house willingly. That I wandered off on my own. Let them try. Dorothy's jaw set with determination. You have evidence. You have witnesses. I saw you under that bridge. I can testify to your condition. And Elodie, you're not senile. You're articulate, your memory is sharp. Any jury would see that. I looked down at the phone in my hands. The small device contained the truth David thought he'd buried. He underestimated me, I said softly. They always do, Dorothy replied. They underestimate older women, especially mothers. They think we're too weak, too ashamed, too broken to fight back. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. But you're about to teach David the most important lesson of his life, that you don't cross a mother who taught school for 40 years and survived. Peter Morrison was everything Dorothy promised, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and ruthless. He listened to my story in his downtown office, the Space Needle visible through the window behind him, and his expression grew darker with each detail. When I played the recording, he closed his eyes. When I showed him the transfer documents, he studied them with the intensity of a jeweler examining a flawed diamond. This is textbook elder financial abuse, he finally said. Combined with the recording, we have evidence of conspiracy, fraud in the inducement, and potentially criminal elder abuse. The fact that you ended up homeless as a direct result, he shook his head. A jury would eviscerate them. I want my house back, I said quietly. You'll get it back. And more. Peter leaned forward. Elodie, with your permission, I'm going to contact the district attorney's office. This isn't just civil fraud, this is criminal. But I need your consent to proceed. I thought about David. About the little boy who'd brought me dandelions. Then I thought about that deadbolt sliding shut, about 3 nights under the bridge, about the cold that had settled into my bones. Do it, I said. The legal wheels turned faster than I'd imagined. Peter filed an emergency injunction blocking the sale of the house. The DA's office opened a criminal investigation. Within a week, David and Nicole were arrested. I wasn't there for that. I was at Dorothy's house, drinking tea, when Peter called with the news. They're offering a plea deal already, he said. They want to avoid trial. Full restitution, return of the property, and David's looking at 3 years suspended sentence with probation if he cooperates. No, I said. Elodie? No deal. I want a trial. I want it on record, what they did, who they really are. I want every person in that courtroom to hear that recording. I want David to sit there and listen to his own voice plotting to freeze his mother out of her own basement. There was a pause. Then Peter said, "You're tougher than they thought." "I'm a mother who taught middle school for 40 years, I replied. I'd dealt with bullies before. The trial took place 6 months later. I sat in the witness box and told my story. I played the recording. I watched David's face as the jury heard his wife suggest cutting heat to the basement, heard him agree. He couldn't look at me. Not once. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. I got my house back. David got 4 years in prison. Nicole got 3. But more than that, I got my voice back. My dignity. My name. I'm Elodie Chen. I taught mathematics to 4 decades of students. I survived loss, betrayal, and 3 nights under the West Seattle Bridge. And I learned that the truth, recorded on a smartphone hidden in a coat lining, is worth more than any house. It's worth everything.